I am so sorry, Josh. You are on mute right now.
Okay, good start.
All right, thank you.
Hello, my name is Josh Etkind. I'd like to welcome you all here today to a Gaia Talks special session. So what is the Society of Petroleum Engineers Gaia Sustainability Program, you may ask? Gaia is, first of all, a unifying brand to create aggregation of aligned efforts. It's an ecosystem of aligned actors, and it's a strategic programming framework that can be adopted by all sections, chapters, committees, and events. Today's topic touches on all three Gaia priorities. First of all, energy system transformation. Secondly, natural capital and regeneration. And thirdly, and most importantly, social responsibilities. It's also relevant to one of our most important Gaia pathways that we call listening and communication. And we've quite intentionally listed listening first. This series was kicked off by Flora Moon's talk on biomimicry a number of weeks ago. So you may ask, why are we here today? I would say that we're here today to start a conversation to bridge the ancient with the emergent. We fully recognize that we won't finish that conversation in 30 minutes. So we expect that this will kick off a series of discussions to both deepen and consider ways of bringing to action time-tested ideas and wisdom that come out from this. And we're looking, how do we enable a smooth and just energy transition? Okay, so our next session will be with Chief Jim Gray. He's the former principal chief of the Osage Nation and a former chairman of the board of the Council of Energy Resource Tribes. And we're planning that for February 2nd, 2022. So please do consider and mark your calendars for that. Plenty of time. And so we're talking today about how do we bring humanity back within planetary boundaries before creating irreversible tipping points in the climate, biodiversity loss, and living conditions. So a great quote that I recently heard by a New York Times best-selling author named Sarah Van Brecknock. The world needs dreamers, the world needs doers, but above all, the world needs dreamers who do. It resonated with me. I hope it resonates with you as well. So we're here to do some reimagining today of a better and more balanced future to set the groundwork for future conversations that are more action-oriented to realize the newly envisioned futurescapes. You may have heard this before, that it is estimated that 6% of the world's population, over 476 million people, self-identify as indigenous peoples. According to an estimate cited by the World Bank, they're protecting about 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, covering a quarter of the Earth's surface. According to the World Economic Forum, more than half of the world's 44 trillion of economic value generation is dependent on nature. So extinction of 83% of wild mammals, 50% of plants, and many other species, of course, it poses a significant risk to corporate and financial stability. Moreover, restoring and protecting nature is one of the most promising strategies for tackling climate change risks. If risk aversion is not enough to garner your attention, then maybe growth in enterprise value and total shareholder return will pique your interest. The combined capitalization of new energy players, you may have heard of Iberdrola, Enel, NextEra, they've grown over 200% over the last 10 years. And when you compare that to the international oil companies, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, BP, they've shrunk collectively 40% over the same period. That's based on McKinsey analysis. So Gaia is about creating change makers and unleashing the power of engineering to solve these problems. That's actually a quote from Chris James, the CEO and founder of Engine Number One. It really made a lot of sense to me, and I think that's very much what Gaia is about. So Indigenous peoples' knowledge about climate resilience and the global contribution to the sustainable management of our shared natural resources is critical to combating climate change and its impacts. Yet their contribution often remains unacknowledged. And too often, Indigenous peoples, they have little access to financial resources or forums for decision-making concerning the environment. severely undermining their opportunities to exert a significant influence over climate policy, planning, and action. Acknowledging and learning from Indigenous peoples' worldview and technologies can support countries in implementing their nationally determined contributions and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Today's discussion intends to put Indigenous wisdom in the center of the conversation and positions us as respectful listeners and learners as Chief Jerry Pardilla shares his gift of experience and wisdom with us. Now I'd like to introduce our guest. Chief Jerry Pardilla. He's a son, a father, a grandfather, a singer and keeper of songs, and is the former chief of the Penobscot Nation in Maine. He's the former executive director of the National Tribal Environmental Council, and he's the current director of the Office of Environmental Resource Management with United South and Eastern Tribes. Prior to joining USET in 2012, his professional career has been devoted to serving Indian country in tribal government, tribal organizations, private sector, and numerous federal committees, primarily related to adoption of tribal consultation policies. He has extensive understanding of tribal natural resource and sustainable development issues gained through both national and regional service, including Deputy Director of the Alaska Intertribal Council. Jerry has held leadership positions in Penobscot tribal government, including Governor and CEO, Lieutenant Governor, Council Member, and Public Service Commissioner. He is passionate about protecting inherent Penobscot sovereignty, especially framed by the Penobscot Treaties and Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, and in preserving Penobscot culture, language, and traditions. And that's something that I know from prior conversations with him he's incredibly passionate about and is very much aligned with his purpose. Jerry was instrumental in revitalizing the Wabanaki Confederacy, which is an alliance of Penobscot, I'm going to hope I don't slaughter these names, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and the Abenaki peoples. He has a Kiowa lineage, and his family tradition was his family traditions were inducted, and in line with his family traditions, he was inducted into the Kiowa Gord clan, which is a Kiowa warrior society. Jerry's also a veteran and served this country as a commissioned officer in the Maine Army National Guard. Jerry and his wife, Marla, live in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. So I'd like to welcome Jerry. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Josh, for your introduction and your guiding thoughts to frame and launch this series. I'm honored to join you and our guests through virtual means to start our conversation about Indigenous cultures and providing insight into the wisdom of my ancestors and elders. As you were introducing, I have a number of tribal lineages from the northeastern woodlands and also from the southern plains. That's a story for another time, how my grandparents met. But suffice it to say that I have a Indigenous background from North America. So the inspiration for our dialogue comes from a long time and also new friendships and the convergences of our professional pursuits. And also the recognition that we can shape the interactions and cross-cultural exchanges to better understand each other and gain understanding of our values, cultures, and also our goals. Today, I would like to introduce you to some thoughts and stories that are drawn from my Penobscot lineage. Just for background, Penobscot is an approximate pronunciation of a landmark that was used to guide those who were coming from the coast off of present-day Maine to the village of our principal chief, and that was called Penobscot. And somehow the English affixed that name to our whole tribal nation, but we called ourselves the people, Alnabe, and the place where we lived is what we were identified with. And so our main village today in what is known in English as Indian Island, which is in central Maine near the town of Old Town. It's called Bunawabskek. And so to properly introduce myself, I would say to you, Willie Spezwo Zidewen, Makwalukak to Lewis, Bunawabskel Nanela. So I'm just telling you who I am and where I'm from in my language. As part of our conversation today, I would like to just tell you a little bit about what the legacy of my ancestors' traditions have imparted to us, and the cultural knowledge that provides explanation for the world around us, and teachings on how to find our place and purpose in life, how to behave and interact socially with peoples. So that means humans and non-humans. My ancestors didn't have Western science taxonomy, and so we differentiated species by referring to ourselves and others as peoples. So we're the two-legged peoples, and there were the four-legged peoples, the winged peoples, and so forth. But our teachings instructed us how to behave and interact responsibly with peoples, and further guided our people to adapt and prosper in our homelands. There is a whole body of narratives that anthropologists and folklorists have classified my Penobscot oral traditions into three categories. And I think in the course of our conversation, I hope that we can touch on those. One is the mythical legends of our distant past, historical tales, and then prophecies for the future. So we understood that there were other humans in the world, and our prophets foretold of their arrival to our homelands. And our conversation today, and I hope that as the series continues, will be focused in on those encounters, the exchanges, the history, and the travails of our exchanges. Some may refer to this as the Columbian Exchange. But what we draw from this is where we're at today and how we may collaborate, leading to beneficial coexistence. So I'll stop there, Josh. I know that you have some guiding questions, and I'm really interested in participating in conversations that are guided by your set of questions.
Thank you so much, Jerry. That's a lovely introduction and really resonates as far as the conversations that have led us up here to today, and also the relevance of this conversation in the future. So I think, let's take a moment to also cast our eyes a bit backwards. History tends to repeat itself if we don't learn from it and adapt our strategies and behavior, recognizing the checkered past of resource development on tribal and First Nations land in North America. What opportunities are now emerging that enable connected resource development, community and cultural preservation, and ecosystem regeneration? How do we balance quarterly profits with 7 generational thinking to select the best options overall?
So as I've listened to your question and pondered it, I've really come to something drawing upon my Penobscot lineage, and it is of the prophecies of our ancestors who foretold of the coming of another people. And I can't place this in any particular time frame, but this may be just one of those historical narratives that has been retold, and the specific date is lost in the mists of time. But we're told that there were other people coming, and that there was to unfold a set of trials and catastrophes that we would experience, and that we would emerge and revitalize our societies in a world marked by harmony and beneficial coexistence. And the first signs of other humans, other peoples coming to our homelands are memorialized in our homeland, in our oral traditions, and they're very significant. The story goes that there was a party of young men who were along the coast, and they came down to the water's edge where a stream ran into the sea, and there they first saw some footprints of left by people that they could not see, but the footprints were very different than their own in that they were marked by what we know now as hard-soled shoes. My indigenous ancestors wore soft-soled moccasins. And so the young men examined these footprints, and they deduced that whoever left them came ashore to get fresh water and then left and returned to the sea. And the young men then went to go get the elder who had traveled with them, and they brought him to examine the footprints, upon which the elder began to weep, because this was the first sign of the unfolding of what is known as the Seven Fires prophecy. And so the party went back to the village, and then those steps then were the first instructions given in our prophecy was to observe and watch these people that had come to our shores and to discern their intentions. And so in our language, we called the Europeans Wenuch, which roughly can be translated as the strangers. But our ancestors over time knew that there were others, that other humans in the world, and they would come to our shores in craft that our people called the great white swans, because of the unfurled sails that we could see from our shores of the ships as they were entering our shorelines. So these observations have led us to understand the intentions of those first encounters and the legacy of those today. And historically, that is our colonial period. We have in our traditions very specific descriptions of each of the fires, each of the levels of trial and catastrophe, but ultimately that we will transcend and come to the seventh fire and move into the eighth fire, where we will be in harmony with all people in our lands, and we will live together and coexist. So I'll pass this back to you now, Josh.
Yeah, Jerry. I mean, it's some of the you hear some of the conversations that are revolving around the COP26 meetings, and I think there's sort of this almost impending doom sort of feeling amongst many people right now when they look at the projections of what is it going to take to actually cut our emissions and limit the impact that we're having on our ecosystems and our biodiversity. And this is one of the sort of rare positive messages that we hear. So I think it's very welcome, hopefully by everyone, to hear that there is hope, and that by coming together we may actually find harmony. And I think the other thing that maybe people worry about is what would that mean for my lifestyle to move back into harmony with Earth? Does that mean I have to give up all of my all of the things that I love and my lifestyle and so forth? I think that finding harmony doesn't always necessarily need that. We also see, within this energy transition that's occurring, a real challenge to optimize sort of that balance between conventional energy to fund the energy transition and the growth of new energy sources. So if I ask you about, much of this crowd is oil and gas professionals, and of course we have quite a diverse group. I mean, we have NGOs that are there. We have people that are, maybe even activists in the environmental world. But looking at oil and gas development going forward, what's a better way to engage with community stakeholders and to create alignment and support? How do we shift the conversation to find common ground and find win-win-win options so that both sides win, as does Mother Earth. Do you have any success stories to bring this to life?
So I'm drawn to a very old story, and maybe a mythical Penobscot story, but it's of a story about something in English, is the frog monster, and in my dialect, this frog, giant frog, has a name, and his name is Umpbugalum, and it's a curious name, but and it's a fun name. But it also, this story was told at a time of when there were teachings for values and how to behave and interact, as I had mentioned before. And the short version of the story is that this is set so long ago, way back when. And the story is told of a time when our people lived in the Penobscot watershed. And there was a giant frog who emerged and began to consume all of the waters. And then to the point he had consumed and left the watershed empty. And so that there was great thirst, and people were in a state of deprivation, and they were destitute. And the people called upon our cultural hero, Gulawaskub, and he responded to the pleas of our people, and came and saw what was the crisis. And so the people asked for Gulawaskub to help them. And so Gulawaskub goes and confronts Umpbugalum, and he forces the frog monster, this giant frog, to regurgitate all of the waters and to restore balance to the land. But as a lesson to Umpbugalum, Gulawaskub breaks the frog monster's back and reduces him in size to where we have the bullfrog today, as a reminder that we must not overconsume or be selfish, that there is an ethic of sharing resources for all, and we must find a way to do that, or there are consequences. So that is an ancestral story that is still told and retold. There have been disputes over the Penobscot River with the state of Maine and of territorial jurisdiction. And we're in litigation and continue to be in litigation over our territorial boundaries. And what is the significance of one of our treaties and the language with respect to the river and Penobscot rights. One of our elders, in a conversation with a local reporter of Central Maine, mentioned the story very, very briefly and very cryptically to a reporter about Umpbugalum. And the reporter just scoffed at such an odd and peculiar way that our elder had indicated his sense of how things would be resolved with the dispute with the state of Maine over territorial rights. And what was entirely lost on the reporter was certainly not having the cultural context, and having heard the story of Umpbugalum and how he was reduced in size, and balance was restored to our Penobscot watershed. Not having any of that, but made fun of our elder and of his trite story, and it had no significance. But it is an example of misunderstanding of cultures and of the cultural logic that we carry forward in how we're instructed to behave and interact socially with each other.
That's good. You know, I because my reflection on that is that by listening to each other, understanding each other's history and stories, that we can have a more balanced conversation, understand the cultural context of such comments, and it brings us all to the same table. So I think that's powerful. And I think many people may be listening to these stories and wondering, why are we taking time to explore these things? It's exactly for that reason, to understand each other's culture, understand each other's backgrounds and context. And it's through that we can come to terms with how do we explore better balance together. So really appreciate you sharing those stories. I'll invite questions from the audience in a moment, but I just wanted to make sure that I asked you this question in the last minutes, because we are kind of coming up on time here. If there was one big shift in mindsets that you wish to catalyze today with the audience, what would that be and why?
So I draw upon the prophecies of my ancestors, and that we will have many trials and challenges and catastrophes, and we are charged with the responsibility to transcend that and overcome those trials and challenges, to emerge in coexistence and to carry on in beneficial coexistence. These are something that have been embedded in my cultural orientation, and it's something that I carry forward, and why I'm so devoted for the cultural knowledge to be imparted not only to present day generations in my Penobscot lineage, but also to inform our efforts so that we have our place and we can join those humans who have come to our shores so many years ago in a very peaceful coexistence and finding mutual productivity and prosperity.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jerry. I'm not sure if we have any questions coming from the audience, but I hope this was an interesting and eye-opening experience for folks. I recognize this is well outside of the wheelhouse of many, maybe outside of the comfort zone for many. But I think it's only by moving outside of that comfort zone that we start moving into a better balance. So any closing comments, Jerry, before we close that out? I'm not seeing any questions arising.
Well, I do. So the relevance of all of this, at least from my singular Penobscot references, are that tribal nations today are a significant part of American society. We're talking millions of tribal citizens. The 2020 census shows there's more than 5 million American Indians, Alaska Natives, and we have control of 100 million acres of land. 15% of the United States energy resources are in tribal lands. And tribal nations are also looking at how to utilize those resources for the rebuilding of nations. And so, and looking to partners and collaborators, tribal nations are those who would like to work with tribal nations would need to have an understanding of the cultural knowledges that tribal nations bring to the table, and what cultural imperatives they're working under, so that there can be development of these resources that are mutually productive and beneficial. So I believe that a better understanding of tribal nations, indigenous peoples, would be a starting point for having those collaborative conversations.
Thank you, Jerry. I think this all starts with curiosity. If people are curious enough to learn about the tribal peoples and indigenous peoples and their technologies and their approaches to limit deforestation, to improve ecosystem health, and to basically balance our coexistence with our brethren, you say, of all the animals and creatures of the earth and all the different types of people that walk this earth together. So I think I'm certainly learning a lot about this in preparation for this conversation and for future conversations. I hope others take a moment and explore some of this with curiosity, and hope to come back with everyone on February 2nd for our next talk with Chief Jim Gray. So I want to thank you so much, Jerry, for taking the time, for all the preparation work, for the great conversation we've had leading up till today, and for sharing the gift of your wisdom today with this audience. So thank you so much, Jerry, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye.